The Louis Burke Frumkes Center for Writing and Culture at Hunter College presents 10 years of best-selling authors and great thinkers.
Who is Katherine Vaz? I'm glad you asked. She is an award-winning author, a former Briggs-Copeland Fellow in Fiction at Harvard University, and a Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute. Her novels include Saudade, how do you pronounce that? Saudade, considered the first contemporary novel about Portuguese Americans from a major New York publisher, and Mariana, which has been printed in 6 languages and was optioned by Anne Harrison, Director of Development for Martin Scorsese. Her collection, Fado and Other Stories, won the Drew Hines Literature Prize, and 2 of the stories from it won Katherine a National Foundation of the Arts Fellowship. Her new collection, The Love Life of an Assistant Animator and Other Stories, will be published by Tailwinds Press in early 2017. Her short fiction has appeared in dozens of magazines, including the Harvard Review, Bomb, Tin House, Glimmer Train, etc., and her children's stories have been included in anthologies by Simon & Schuster, Viking, and Penguin, among others. For icing on the cake, she is married to Chris Cerf, the Emmy and Grammy-winning TV producer, composer, editor, author, and creator of the new Donald Trump Muppet for Sesame Street. That last line, of course, is fictional, but I'm hoping he will do that since he has a lot of clout in that area. Katherine?
Thanks very much, Louis, and for the invitation to be here, and thanks also to the wonderful staff who've been really helpful, too. In addition to Chris maybe writing a lot of the songs for Sesame Street, he actually had a Muppet made after him, which is a dream I still have, to be a Muppet, but he is actually, they made a Muppet after him because he plays rock and roll piano and he broke the keys once when he was playing, so they did a little Muppet with wild hair who breaks pianos. Anyway, Louis asked me really to talk to you about my pathway as a writer, and I thought it would be interesting and fun to tell you the love story of a love story that I've been working on for 10 years that I put away for about 2 and then got out again thinking this will be the year I finish, and I'm only halfway done and the year is almost over, but that's how writing goes. I would say if I was going to pick the moment I became a writer was when I was about 12, and my father and most of his family were from the Azores, and my godmother had a housekeeper named Mrs. Correa who locked herself out of her house, and my father sent me over with the key, and obviously this is way before you could call on a cell phone, and she was also, she didn't read or write Portuguese or English, and her English was, pretty shaky. But I asked my father why she just didn't go next door to her neighbors and use the phone. And he said, well, she can't dial a phone. She doesn't recognize numbers because they look like fish hooks to her. She can't identify them. And he said, and she can't, I knew she couldn't read or write also. And she said, they look like just little black lines on a paper. And my father just said, I think she thinks in color. And he made a placard with dots of paint, and he took her phone dial, and he put color over the phone numbers. And he made a placard with the 7 dots of color, and she dialed in color. So I think that was the moment I became a writer, because it was automatically understood that it was metaphor. And some of my early stories, I guess, got a reputation for what's so-called magical realism. And what I knew immediately was that magical realism was just telling a reality and not bothering to make it magical. So that really was my, I guess, falling in love with wanting to be a writer. And because I understood that it was a different kind of language and that you could do things like dial in color and think in color. My father was, he passed away it's 3 years ago now, and I miss him because he would come out with really weird lines about his upbringing. And he had a fear of the dark when he was a little boy, and he said, well, you know, the cure for that in my family was taking a stitch in a dead man's arm. And I said, what? And who knows what that was for? I might have misheard it. It might have been said was, giving somebody oatmeal or something, but I didn't want to hear it corrected. So I ended up writing a story called Taking a Stitch in a Dead Man's Arm that was in Bomb magazine. Anyway, what I thought I would do would be to talk just a little bit about my novel in progress. And this was a presentation in brief I made at Radcliffe. And you can see it says Below the Salt with a nice salt shaker that a friend of mine found for me. The title's already been changed to A Portuguese Night Blessing, because below the salt is, some of you probably know what that expression means, which is if you're sitting in a prominent household, if you sit below the salt, that means you're invited to the table, but you're sitting sort of below the condiments and you're in a lesser place at the table. If you sit above the salt, it means you're sitting near the master or the mistress of the house. But anyway, I'm going to change that to Portuguese Night Blessing. Just to start with my idea of writing, and I haven't taught in a while, but I used to tell students how much I loved what I called vertical reading, vertical thinking, which is instead of just like in a linear way, what's the story and you follow it along, what's the thing that if you sink into when you're reading something, what's the image that you go inside? And I used to keep, this is Arnolfini's, the marriage of Arnolfini Marriage, which a lot of you recognize, it's a famous painting, but I keep it near my desk because a lot of you probably know this, but that mirror in the background, it's hard to see, but it's the Passion of Christ that's painted around the mirror, but it's done in such a tiny way you can barely see it. And if you look in the mirror, it's a picture of us looking in. So I like to think of, that's sort of my metaphor for writing. Like you have a prominent scene and it's got color, it's got action, it's got mystery, it's a marriage. She's actually not pregnant, but that looks like she is, but that's the way you hold that kind of dress at the time. But I would always keep that around because I would keep that thinking, how do you think vertically? And when I do research, I like to think, what's the vertical thing that's going to go in? One of my editors said, you do a lot of scroll work, and she meant it as a compliment, but also sort of not. Like that you put those little things inside what you're writing that the viewer may not know are even there, but it enriches what you've done because you've put them in there. Anyway, I guess when you talk about a love story, and if you talk about a long project like the one I've been working on, you fall out of love every now and then. You're still attached, but I worked on a draft of this starting in 2005, and I thought it was a mess. I didn't like the character. And then my life changed. I went through a divorce. I moved to the East Coast from California, and I threw everything in a box. And when I moved to Cambridge, the box broke, and all the stuff spilled out onto my floor, and I was starting just like kicking it to put it back in the box, and there was a picture that there you can see better the mirror, and that's the reflection of what you see if you magnify that. So there's something about he put it in a really meticulous way in that painting that enriches it in a way you may not even know or see, but is really there, and it's you participating in seeing that. Anyway, this is the top page of what fell out of my broken box as I moved across the country. And I'd been writing from a female point of view, and I suddenly looked at that character in the lower right-hand corner. There's an old man there. But I thought, wait a minute, this is your story more than hers. I've got the wrong lead. And I thought, what was I thinking? This is going to slightly relate to I guess we can all agree in this room I guess it's literally the elephant in the room. The horror story of the election is, this is about a group of people who are from Madeira, which is a Portuguese island that's off the coast of Africa. It's kind of Casablanca is due east from it. And there was a Scottish missionary who went there in the mid-19th century and converted about 2,000 of them to Presbyterianism. So they were violently driven off the island. I mean, I was sitting in the National Library reading, and I don't know if it was the humidity, the musty books, or what I was reading, because it was very graphically violent of people being bitten to death, and I mean, really graphic stuff. I fainted in the National Library of Madeira, I'm proud to say. But his mother was condemned to die for heresy. And he grew up in jail with her, I mean, in a small village. So I thought, what was I thinking? I mean, of course, you're my lead story. This is a baby who grew up in jail with his mother. I do like to, but this is fiction. This isn't history. And there's a story in my own family that there was a branch of my dad's family that was very, very poor in the Azores, and they would sing when they were hungry. It was to distract them, but they called it eating their music. And it was also so you didn't beg or ask for charity, but the neighbors would all say, oh, the little birds are singing, they must be hungry again, and they would bring them food. But the nickname for my family was Os Passarinhos, which was the little birds. So I thought, wait a minute, well, if he's in jail and they were starving them, I thought I'll just call them the little birds, and that she sings to her baby in the jail. I'm going to read you maybe a page of that when we get to the end. So there's something about, I was actually asked to give a talk at the Library of Congress at one point, and it was the map division, believe it or not, who said, there's this weird group of Portuguese people in Illinois. Do you know about them? I said, no, and she said, they're Protestants. And I said, the Portuguese Protestants of Illinois, I love that. That is really weird. But here's how this ties in sort of with the American landscape right now. They were violently driven off the island. They suffered in Trinidad, and then the societies in Illinois got wind of what was happening, and they adopted them. They brought about 1,000 of these people to Springfield and Jacksonville, Illinois, around the time of Lincoln. A lot of them ended up working for Lincoln, including my character. They would do odd jobs. The Lincolns were famous for not having, regular, steady help other than maybe one or two people. But he courted somebody he met in the Lincoln household. So I thought, so he went from a jail in a little village in Madeira to courting a woman in the Lincoln household. They were, then he joined the Union Army, was wounded, and he spent a long time trying to find her. So it was sort of my love in the time of cholera, but, with Latin people in the Civil War. Yeah, he gave an interview as an old man when he went back to the house, the Lincoln household, and it's one of those almost cinematic things where he's 80 years old, he goes up into the house, and he hears a man named John Drinkwater, who is a British playwright, describing the play he'd done and how the house was heated. And my character, John Alves was his name, spoke up and said, no, that's not the way it was. They would heat it with stoves. And John Drinkwater said, well, I probably made a number of errors. Why don't you show me the rest of the house? And they walked around together. And he was apparently overcome with thinking, this is where I courted Mary. And he asked John Drinkwater to sign his name in the Lincoln Ledger when they left, because his hand was shaking so terribly. And John Drinkwater did it. And when I went to go do some research at the library there, I said, let's get out the Lincoln Ledger. I mean, I want to see how close he got to being accurate. It's verbatim the way he said it was. So anyway, this was the article that you might say kind of geared me in. You can see above there it says, Curly Horse for Fremont, Apparently, my character had a sense of humor. He threw a sheepskin over the horse when John C. Fremont came stumping into Jacksonville, Illinois, because P.T. Barnum was taking around something called the curly horse. It was kind of a freak show thing. So my character actually made one for Fremont. I thought, that's pretty cool. But he said, at the time, I was 21, courting a young girl named Mary DeFreitas, who was a governor and seamstress in the Lincoln home. Mary took care of the two little boys, Todd and Robert. I used to talk to Lincoln sometimes when I went to the house, and he was always pleasant. I was pretty bashful then. I thought, okay, that seems an interesting jump. And here's where he meets John Drinkwater. I distinctly remembered Mr. Lincoln used that fireplace and burned wood in it. All the rest of the house he had heated with stoves. I spoke up and told them so. And then he talks about the famous playwright taking him around. And here's what caught my attention, I guess, the most. When I was at Radcliffe, Geraldine Brooks gave a talk. And she said, because she's done a lot of historical things, she said what she looks for is what she calls the gap, which is where fiction thrives. So in other words, it's the thing like, well, what happened? Why aren't you telling that? And my character had one. He was wounded at Vicksburg. He was wounded at Shiloh. He got mustered out at Springfield in 1864. And then there's a blank year. And then he says, in the fall of 1865, I came west. And he wanders the west for pretty much the rest of his life. So I thought he came home, I bet, trying to find Mary. And either she was married, she was dead, something. So my novel is in that blank space. That's kind of the key to what I'm trying to write about. So it's kind of a, I guess a love story. Ancestry.com is wonderful because you can look anyone up. And my character married someone who was 14 years younger than he was, which was really like, wow, John. Here's the Lincoln Ledger, and it's, John Drinkwater, Birmingham, England, John Alves, written by me at Mr. Alves' request, age 80. So it was verbatim the way he said it in the article. What I like about writing is that James Joyce had a line about when you're writing well, you can stand on a street corner and the word you're looking for will blow in a piece of paper up to your feet. And I was just wandering around Springfield, and there was an 1849 roster of businessmen of Springfield, Illinois for $4. And it was the ledger of all the people who lived there. The names are great. I mean, their names like, Joshua and Silas and Zebediah and, all the, wonderful old names. And then here's a page of it. Mr. Greenleaf was the nursery and florist, which was, fiction, you can't actually give anyone the name Greenleaf to run a thing, but there it was. That's his mother. She's the one who went to jail for heresy and was condemned to die because she was the most apparently outspoken. She told a priest, if you don't know, it's called transubstantiation. Catholics believe that the body of Christ is really Christ or God. And Protestants think, well, it's bread, and he blesses it, and, that's fine, whatever you want to think. But people have been slaughtered over this issue. And she apparently told the priest that not only wasn't God not in the bread, it was pretty bad bread to begin with. So they condemned her to die. She was in jail for about 2.5 years till they commuted her sentence. The missionary went and basically got her free. I love wandering around and looking at things. There's a revolving mirror show in Springfield, which is, I think, okay, that has to be a scene in the book. Like they show waterfalls, like in, circling mirrors. This is Madeira. And you can see how terraced and beautiful, and it's a violent place. It's really precipitously violent and kind of inbred too, and interesting. But they were. It has a huge British influence, so you can see how it's kind of wild in one way, but very terraced, and it's more of the British Garden also. But this is Illinois, so one of the ways to write, I think, is when you're doing historical fiction. It's not just about facts. It's really looking at color and the pictures. And that was Madeira. That's where they came from. This is what they went to. So they didn't know what cold really meant. And, you know, that looks pretty cold. And it's flat. So they had a feeling of nothing to hang on to, in a way. There was... This just touched me. You can actually right away and get any veteran's file. And I sent away just to see what happened to him. And I fell out of love with this book at one point and just put it away. And I was at Radcliffe and I got a fellowship to work on it there. And I called a friend up and I said, I don't know, I don't think I can do it. And she said, oh, Katherine, just go home and relax and, you know, think about it. And it's uncanny. I sent away from it, but they were told me it would take about 6 weeks, and it got there within about 6 days. And it was the day I was going to give up. And this was one of the first things I saw, him begging for his pension. He said, I have no family at all with whom I can live. I cannot live by myself. And it choked me up. And I thought, all right, I'm really sorry. I'll take you back. I'll take care of you. And these are the old pictures of, you know, like the, this is his Army discharge papers. Anyway, so where I am now with this is I put it away a long time, and I tried to finish it actually when my father was terminally ill, and I thought, you know, this will be a kind of breathing life into a difficult situation. And really what it was just things telling me that it wasn't working. So I put it all away for a long time and got it out again. And I thought, well, this is kind of a love story now that's been going on for 12 years of trying to work on a book. And I've worked on it a long time, and it's been a big sacrifice. But it feels like it's a voyage that's come back to me somehow. I can thank Tony Doerr for writing All the Light We Cannot See, because I thought short chapters are really, really good. Anyway, that's a quick walkthrough through some of the research that I thought was kind of fun to do, and fed my imagination, fed some of the scenes. So what I think I'll do now is just maybe read you some of the pages from that in progress, and then I'll switch gears and read one page from something else, and then maybe we can open up and just have a discussion, and happy to answer any questions you might have. But anyway, let me read you maybe about 5 pages, about not more than 10 minutes from this work in progress. Okay, this is one of the opening chapters called The Island of Madeira, 1843. For a long time, when he lived in jail with his mother, he ate nothing but the music of birds. Her name was Maria Joaquina Alves, a 35-year-old widow on the Portuguese island of Madeira, condemned to die for heresy and blasphemy, for chatting like friends with the Presbyterian God. Her son John gripped her skirts when the soldiers seized her, and at first they considered him a burr attached to a prisoner. Then they decided to use him to break her. If she wanted to save him, she must return to the banquet of our Lord, the communion of her youth. Otherwise, they'd starve John alongside her. The jail was in their village outside the capital city. Stone floor, stone walls badly whitewashed, scent of lime, iron bars. The hours were wintry and damp. Hungry? Said Tonio Dutra, the guard. His eyes were red, his hair was ginger. His left ring finger was disturbingly shorter than normal. Return to the one true faith, Senor Alves. He wore a pretty smile. We'll eat some songs, John, she whispered to her trembling child. Music would feed them. They would drink the sounds of creation sailing past the window. She told the guard they were birds themselves. Rock doves and gulls screamed close by and far away. Melodies traveled into their cell, And at first, John and his mother dined very nicely on quite the little orchestra of their fellow birds. I'm going to skip to a section that introduces you to the female lead, a woman named Mary Freitas, who's pretty much an invention because it's hard to find anything about her. But this is another very short chapter about Maria Freitas. Black sugar sand, red hibiscus. Maria Freitas is almost 4 years old, eyes gleaming violet, black hair braided. In a searing breeze, her father in his bathing costume wades into the sea. The sand is the shade of ground-up night with sparkles. The moment is eternal. Maria waves when Papa turns to her. He beams and waves back. She waits, but he does not return. She runs back to her house in the city near the Scottish kirk with its manicured gardens where dragonflies stitch up and down. Her mother and Uncle Jose organize search parties, divers, fishing boats look for Papa. If Maria sits very still, she tells herself, if she does not flinch, he'll rise up like the sharks he draws on his maps. We'll climb the pier, gasping but safe. Every day she sits on that beach until her sobbing mother insists she come home. If Maria walks 3 times around the lilies near the wine shop, her father can come home. If she claps once when she first wakes up, God will listen. If she does the Catholic thing of crossing her fingers under her pillow, her dreams, which are full of empty rooms and griffins like the ones Mother designs for the embroidery factory, it will point her toward Papa. If she says Father is a swordfish and blinks 4 times, he'll breathe underwater. At night, Mama howls. The gossip is unrelenting. He drowned himself to get away from Ana. What man can bear her anxiety? He swam to the island of Porto Santo and married a girl of 13. An accident, a drifting to the bottom, nothing more. Uncle Jose leaves his new wife to cook for Ana and Maria. He distracts Maria by teaching her to sew. He smells like licorice and salt. He takes a boat out each day because Papa might be drifting on a raft built of kelp. She extracts threads from cloth to make cutwork, as if she's been doing it for 100 years. You have the gift, he whispers. What she does not have is her father. Uncle Jose teaches Maria bordure anglaise. She whip stitches around the openings she's made. Eyelets form leaves, daisies. He shows her Guimarães white work when he visits after repairing nets, tucking the coverlet over his sister who's taken to her bed, brewing Japanese tea and sharing the sardines stolen from the bins behind the hotels. White, beige, or blue, monochrome stitches with bullion knots using a milliner's needle, the kind with the eye end as thin as the point end. She always threads it on her first attempt. You're a work of art yourself, he tells her. Your father would be proud. Ana, Uncle Jose says, patting Maria's mother, she stays curled up on her mat. She stops working at the embroidery factory. Uncle Jose forces Ana to accompany him, Marie, and Toad to the botanical gardens, where ferns hang off banana trees, custard apple trees. Isn't it a reason to live, seeing those camellias, agapanthus, red trumpets like floral screams? They meet José Vicente Barbosa do Bocage, who loves zoology and plants as much as poetry and politics. And he gives Maria a cutting off a shrub called the miracle plant. The man is kind, his beard groomed. He wears a bow tie to honor the plants. Bocage says, for good luck, sweetheart. It is what Papa called her. Bocage acts like Papa, has his manners. Thank you, says Ana, but her voice is far away. In their garden, the roots settle in. Maria waters them. Her mind whirls with miracle, father. She gets so good at white work that Uncle Jose teases that the British will steal her. Stitching dissolves time. When she completes a garland and dots it with seed stitches, she gives herself permission to think of her father. His mustache was trim, and he was proud of a parchment on which he wrote in lemon juice, X marks the treasure. To thrill her, he held a lit match well below the paper until the words appeared in sepia. He could not have committed suicide, as Senora Borges has been gossiping. If she feeds the miracle plant with coffee grounds, it will grow into a crop from which she can make enough money to get Mama medicine for her nerves. If Maria does a perfect passion flower in turkey-stitched loops, Mama will stop crying. This is just a very brief chapter when he first expresses his love for Mary. In the heart of the new country, John would declare to Mary, "A little bird told me that your mother brought you and everyone else to the hill to sing when I was in jail, because I couldn't live without my mother. Your name was once Maria Freitas. Your mother was famous, John, and so were you." Even in the dark, Mary's eyes possessed him. "If you want it like that, my dear, I was famous for a time. Do you want it like this?" he added, pulling her, smiling deeply on top of him. She exclaimed John when his hand was on her, as if she had no choice but to name the most tender parts of herself after him. With her sinking onto him, taking him into herself, he adored touching for the longest while every bobbin that stacked up to make her spine. "Tell me your story, John." They both liked to talk when he was inside of her. They wanted to make his being there last longer by talking, so that when they were apart and conversing with other people, they could feel that behind speaking, one could keep on making love. Before the battle at Shiloh, he would write to her, "The bones in a bird's wing are a perfect match with the skeleton in the hands of men. Oh, Mary, I was so excited when I found this out. If I should die, you need only look up, Mary. Watch the creatures sweeping across the sky. Inside their wings, I'll fit the bones of my hands, and I'll rake across all the air I can find, so that my touch can ride everywhere until it finds you." On their last night before he left for the war, he finished his story by saying, "This little bird who told me about you coming to the jail was my sister, and she claimed you wailed as if the world were ending, because of course you were a baby in your mother's arms." And John felt but did not know how to say, "Your cry fed me before I even met you. You entered me before I knew daylight is a thing that is complete and stretches over the heads of people and hooks itself over the moon, the kind of daylight that is not chopped to pieces. You put the thread of your cry into my ear when I was 3 and you were only 1 year old. Your cry into my ear in bed with me is my treasure, because it meets the echo I have always known and carried of you inside myself from the start." I think I'll stop there, and just to read you one page from my most recent book, which isn't so recent anymore, but this is also how fiction, I think, works with one's own life. I guess this is a relevant story for people in New York as much as California, that the home values are really difficult. And my Portuguese great aunt lived in a compound in a town called Castrovelhas near Oakland. And it was going to be converted to condos. And all the Portuguese and Spanish women in that building couldn't afford it. They were all on fixed incomes. I mean, and they were invited to buy the condo if they wanted, and they were living on like $900 a month. So as a joke, she said, "Oh, I'll just paint the Virgin Mary on the side of the building, and they'll think it's a miracle site, and they won't, pull it down." And she was joking, but I thought that would be a very funny story. So I wrote a story called Our Lady of the Artichokes, which is a entire thing. And, I'll just read you less than a page of that. "We need to invent us a virgin," said my Tia Connie. She came up with her scheme to fight the landlord while I was lying on the sofa muffled in its original plastic so that I crinkled every time I breathed. He doubled our rent. She'd already remarked a dozen times, "May he die with his mouth twisted." And I should have been fascinated that we were weeks from being thrown into the street, but all I wanted was for her to keep crocheting, watch her Jeopardy to learn better English. She also watched it in the hope that one night there'd be a category about the Azores and she could pretend to win thousands of dollars, and leave me to sharpening my fantasy that a banker, I'd named him Nolan, would carry me away in his Jaguar. Tia would be grateful for the checks we'd send. I sat up to make sure her plan was entering my ears right. We would issue a scream heavenward. It would ricochet back to earth, that we'd beheld an apparition of the Virgin Mary outside this very apartment building, Estadia Gardens on East 14th Street in San Leandro. I asked why Mary would think of blazing a path here, and Tia Connie looked hurt and said, I tend so nice those artichokes in the patch in front. She'll visit, be Our Lady of the Artichokes, perch on the thorns. She'll cry and cry, then disappear. People will say, come back to me, water me your tears. The landlord's son of a bitch gets trampled, maybe to death. That part I cannot help. All right.
Catherine, was that it, and then you wanted to open it? Thank you, Catherine. Those were beautiful words. You used bird a lot. Birds must mean something special to you. I wanted to just mention, before we open it to questions and discussion, if you wish, there are a bunch of books over there. If you want to purchase one, Catherine will be happy to inscribe it to you for a gift, for yourself, whatever. Meanwhile, who has a question for Catherine or a thought? Sabino.
The vertical method of writing that you were referring to when you first put up the...
Yeah, that's my shorthand for how something can suggest something that makes you go inside or deeper into that instead of moving on from it. And I guess maybe a good example is if I say the word rose to you, what's the first thing you think of? Yeah, that's everyone's answer. But when you know this, that roses come in all sorts of colors. But it's interesting how we generally stop and think of red. So the word rose, which is itself kind of a coloration of a red, is a pink color. That's a really quick example of vertical thinking, vertical processing. That's just the word I use for it, that the word red appears for you when you hear that word. The word red isn't there in front of you. So it's just carried into it, and you kind of go deep. It's in some ways, let me give you another example that's a little more linear. Eudora Welty has this beautiful one-page example in her book, One Writer's Beginnings, talking about being in her house and listening to her father when she's a little girl. They had kind of a humming contest or whistling contest in the morning while they were getting ready. It's a very simple thing. Daddy is shaving, Mom is making breakfast, and there's bacon, and she's using a button hook to get her shoes on, and then she's going to run clattering down the steps to meet them. And she mentions that it sounds like the Merry Widow. And we don't know till we get to the end of the book that her father dies. So she's planting in what I think of as a vertical way something about widowhood in this beautiful, happy scene, so that that word processes in your brain in that scene, even though you don't know at the time that that's going to happen. So I guess it's a way of thinking, going like this instead of saying what happens next. It's like what's the abstract coloration of the thing that's happening there?
Yes, the gentleman over here.
Hi, Jim Story. I'm a writer too, and I have a question. Whatever possessed you to get rid of a title like Below the Salt? I think that's a wonderful title.
I've gone back and forth so many times. I don't, one of the things is it's good to have food words in titles. I might go back to it, but an editor said, why don't you call it the Portuguese Night Blessing, because that's a little more discernible. So I'll tell her that somebody voted for Below the Salt. I should just take a poll and then pick one. I can use maybe Below the Salt as a subtitle. What's that? I know. Oh, we know that. Oh, just to complete the thought about what this has to do with the. I can't even put the words out. Is that this country adopted 1,000 people who needed a home, gave them free land, gave them jobs, and true, they were a voting bloc in Illinois because the Catholics were coming in and were mostly Democrats. So this was, kind of a voting bloc for, and Illinois, as you know, was, one of the free states, but people from Missouri were flooding up and they were Democrats. So it was a voting bloc, but still it was a very charitable thing to have done. They took in all these refugees who were destitute. So at one point, this country did things like that.
Any more?
How old were you when you moved from Azores? Wondering what...
I grew up in California. I was born and raised in California. My father is from the Azores and probably came to California when he was about 10. And people from his island were mostly dairy people. They weren't fishermen. And my father wrote a book called The History of the Portuguese in California, and he was very involved in, a lot of those societies there that, Portuguese culture and so on. But so my father's English is his second language, but I grew up speaking English, yeah.
Any other questions? If not, thank you for
Thank
a
you very,
lovely
very much.
talk, Catherine. And please enjoy the rest of the